Good evening. Welcome to the forum on behavior for the Newburgh School District. I'm Ed Forget, the interim superintendent, and our team is here with a variety of the partners that work with the district to support our students. Thank you for joining us as we share how the district is navigating the behaviors resulting from the pandemic. Several questions have been received, and we use those responses and those questions to design the agenda for this evening. We encourage you to submit follow-up questions using the form that is on the district website. So as you hear conversations this evening, if you didn't have a chance to submit a question, please go on the district website and submit that question. We read each of those questions, we take them seriously, we reflect on them, and we will respond to them. Tonight you're going to hear a presentation on data specific to the district and making connections to what's happening across the country. We will also be sharing the various initiatives and strategies currently being implemented to support our students. And finally, we've assembled a team of district partners who are dedicated to supporting our students, families, faculty, and staff. At this time, we'll begin the data presentation, and I will turn this over to Ms. Onyx Peterson, our Deputy Superintendent.
Good evening, everyone. Data can show interested parties what is really occurring and what the picture of our schools, what's happening in our schools daily. It looks at individual incidents and consequences that our students face. And it also requires us to understand the data and how we're collecting it so that we can look at the information together to make better choices for our students and for our daily operations. To take a look, first we want to look at our national data in terms of what schools are experiencing post-COVID. So I'm going to hand this over to Mrs. Soto, the Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum Instruction Secondary.
Thank you, Ms. Peterson. So my partner, Mr. Christopher Baer, Assistant Superintendent of Exceptional Learners, and I will provide you with a snapshot of the national social and emotional pandemic trends. We would like to share that this year we expected a rocky adjustment for our students. We figured we'd see more students who felt anxious, frustrated by their schoolwork, or disoriented by unfamiliar routines. A month into school, we immediately recognized the greater challenge ahead. School personnel across the country say they are seeing an uptick in disruptive behaviors. Some are obvious and visible, like TikTok videos of students trashing bathrooms, fighting over social media posts, or running out of classrooms. Others are quieter calls for help, like students putting their head down and refusing to talk. The behavior issues are a reflection of the stress the pandemic placed on children, upending their education, schedules, and social lives. For students dealing with grief, mental health issues, or the layered effects of poverty and racism, big transitions can be even more challenging. This evening, we will touch upon how the pandemic has been associated with high school student behavior patterns and trends across the nation. Mr. Bayer and I will note national data indicators regarding social emotional well-being, home and community trauma, drug and alcohol use and abuse, and the impact of social media. Next slide, please. It is clear that trauma can cause serious problems with learning and behavior. I'd like to define trauma. Trauma is an emotional response from an event or circumstances that are interpreted as harmful or life-threatening.
Ms. Soto,
Pardon me.
That's okay. So of the four buckets, the one that I want to talk about right now is about mental health. So Ms. Soto and I used two surveys that were done by the CDC over the past couple of years. They surveyed over 7,700 students to talk about and learn about the impact that the pandemic has had on them across the nation. So in the report, it indicates that 66.6% of students across the nation felt that they had difficulties with their schoolwork. And additionally, about 44.6% of students also felt disconnected or didn't have any connection to the school environment. A third, about 37%, also indicated that they had poor mental health during the COVID pandemic, and that 44% that they were persistently felt hopeless and sad during the past year. One of the data points that concerned us was the fact that emergency room visits for suicide attempts went up pretty substantially, especially for girls, 50.6 and 3.7 for boys. And you'll see, and what we'll present is that what we saw in the CDC data was that girls were disproportionately impacted around a lot of the risk factors compared to boys. It makes the point that it's important to know that from previous pandemics, and there's a quote there from the CDC article, that this is not something that once we brought our students back, that it gets resolved, that these issues that our students or the students across the nation dealt with throughout the pandemic are enduring and long-lasting, and they're not going to be dissipating anytime soon. The survey also makes a point, and something that we've talked about, is the fact that the pandemic did not create these issues, that these issues were in place and were concerning to educators for a period of time. And the data you see at the bottom of this slide indicates what some of the risk factors have looked like over a 10-year period, with increases around sadness and hopelessness, suicide attempts, and even the idea of suicide. So it's important to note that the pandemic did not cause these issues, but they did exacerbate them, and we're definitely seeing them play out. Thank you, Ms. Soto.
Thank you, Mr. Baer. So as I mentioned earlier, it is clear that trauma can cause serious problems with learning and behavior. I'd like to define trauma again. Trauma is an emotional response for an event or circumstances that are interpreted as harmful or life-threatening. They have the potential to result in lasting negative effects on one's physical, mental, social, emotional well-being. According to a CDC report, where thousands of students across the United States were surveyed, noted that more than half of the students reported they experienced emotional abuse by a parent or other adult in the home, which included swearing at, insulting, or putting down the student. 11% experienced physical abuse by a parent or other adult in the home, including hitting, beating, kicking, or physically hurting the student. More than a quarter reported a parent or other adult in their home lost their job, which increases depression, anxiety, and fear of the unknown. Trauma is particularly challenging for educators to address because kids don't often share their feelings in a way that is recognizable. They mask their pain with behaviors that are aggressive or off-putting. I want to also stress that these may be lasting effects. They may not be temporary. Next slide. Adolescent substance abuse represents an important area of concern. During the pandemic, many adolescents across the United States experienced factors that increase risk for substance abuse, including social isolation and boredom, stress from fear about COVID-19, grief, economic, housing, and food insecurity, and disruption to medical, mental health, and social services. Again, a CDC report during the months, data collected during the months of January through June of 2021, reported that nearly 32% of high school students across the United States use any tobacco product, alcohol, or marijuana, or current misuse of prescription opioids. Nearly 20% of these students reported current alcohol use. 15.4% students reported using electronic vapor products. Nearly 13% of the students in the United States reported using marijuana. It was also reported that marijuana was more prevalent among high school students across the United States. 3.3 reported current cigarette smoking, 2.3 reported cigar smoking, and nearly 2% of the students reported taking smokeless tobacco. According to the National Institute of Health, the percentage of adolescents across the United States reported drug use decreased significantly in 2021 as the COVID-19 pandemic endured. It was lower due to the availability of drugs and alcohol. After the lockdown lift, we saw an increase in at-risk behaviors. Mr. Baer?
Thank you. So the next area that we're going to talk about is the impact of social media. This has come to light, especially this year, as we see a significant number of videos being posted on events throughout the nation. We relied upon a couple of research articles on this. One is the Pew Foundation that indicates that 95% of teenagers have a smartphone, and that of those, 70% of them use Snapchat and Instagram frequently, which we see playing out locally. When we looked at what the research shows, it's whether or not this is positive or negative, and they're still developing research around this to know the true impact of social media. It has some positive and some negative. But they do note, the number of researchers, that depression and anxiety is increased with the overuse of social media and the reliance upon it as a mitigator for your social life. There's this concept around FOMO that young people feel the need to always either be part of something or see something, and everything needs to be public. It needs to either be videotaped or seen and then shared with friends, and they refer to that which, fear of missing out. It's important to know we looked at one research where article where Dr. Eshelin talked about the fact of what it does to child development. And what we're seeing is that there's this trend of just videotaping violent acts and not acting upon them, not intervening, not getting help, both in the community and in schools across the nation. And what they're saying is that our students don't have the executive functioning. As young people, that develops well into your 20s. And they don't have the executive functioning to understand the impact of what they do when they present or they videotape, and the impact that has on others. And in some cases, they're reporting that how much it desensitizes students to the idea of what violence actually does developmentally. So it's something that we need to watch because they're being used and in many ways being overused. There is a positive impact of social media, and that's important to note during the pandemic, that there were a number of marginalized groups that used social media as a way to reach out to and develop a community. So the LGBT community, for example, where maybe they were in a school environment throughout the nation where they were maybe isolated and alone. During the pandemic, they were able to develop communities of like-minded people to help support them. So it's not all negative, but it's important to note what it does both to the possible mental health concerns as well as what it's doing to our kids' brains as we post and overpost these acts that are occurring both locally and nationally. The last thing I'm going to say, and then we'll turn it over, is the idea of what the pandemic has done to our kids. This is a slide that I think really represents the interrupted learning and the impact it's had on our kids social and emotionally. We know that the routines that we develop as educators have positive impact on our kids. And this slide really represents what the last normal school year was based on the grade level that your children are in. So it's important to note that, we have kids who age into kindergarten, we have kids who age into middle school, and we have kids who age into the high school. And if you see like 8th and 9th graders, or really 9th and 10th graders, or current 9th and 10th graders, the last time that they were in school and had a normal school year was, in their middle school, 6th and 7th grade, which means they never developed the understanding of what high school is and the routines that come with that. And the same is true for our 6th and 7th graders that you can see, as well as our 5th graders and all the way down. So we're reintroducing the idea of what school is, what routines are, what expectations are socially, the idea that kids have not been able to socialize in a normalized way for a number of years, and especially as they move from level to level.
So now that we have taken a look at national data and trends around social emotional issues, and we're going to take a look at NECSD's approach to discipline and our discipline data. So yearly, the district looks at the code of conduct, and it's developed with how the district is going to approach student behavior and consequences around incidents that may occur in our school buildings. The approach that we use when developing the code of conduct is that we are going to be restorative in nature, and we're really going to try to re-engage our children in learning. It is not to be punitive. It is trying to build their skills to be able to function within our learning environments. So our administrators take a progressive approach to consequences when it comes to behavior. So there are a lot of things that an administrator, when an incident does occur within a school building, takes into account when disciplining a student. So we look at the age, the developmental place where the student is at, whether they're a student with a disability, and this all comes from the district code of conduct. We're also going to look at the student's behavior, attitude towards the behavior, how they interact with the administrator when the incident happens. All of those things come into account when we are giving out consequences. So it's progressive in nature. When we're examining discipline data, we also need to take into account some terms and definitions so that we all understand the approach that we do have to take, and understanding when we say an incident, what does an incident mean? So an incident is one act. Now, that one act can have several students attached to it, but it's counted as one incident. And this is the way, the framework from the federal and the state government in terms of how we track discipline data. We also have categories by which we must put those incidents into. So our code of conduct is aligned to different categories, whether it's insubordination, whether it's a minor altercation. So you'll see those if you do pull up our code of conduct. They're predetermined different types of categories. Then we have the level of the offenses. So again, discipline is progressive in nature. So I can have an insubordination that happens within the classroom between student and teacher that may be a level 1. And this is usually something that a teacher or a student support personnel can speak with the student, engage in a conversation about the behavior and try to correct. All the way up to level 4, where if the insubordination is to the degree and it's been progressive and the student has been spoken to, can lead to an out-of-school suspension, and perhaps, if it's that severe, to a superintendent's hearing. A consequence when we're speaking about behavior is the discipline that the administrator attaches to the behavior and the incident that occurs within the school building. So I just wanted to make sure that we took some time to define those things, because as we go through data, it's important to know that this is the way the data is formatted. The next thing that I really wanted to talk about is the caveats for the data analysis that we did on the district-wide. Mr. Place is going to take you through some slides about our incidents and consequences across our district. The first thing that we want to say is that we wanted to compare apples to apples. So there's a lot of things that happened through the pandemic. There was a time in 2021 where we were mostly virtual and we did not have that many behavioral incidents. So we wanted to make sure that we looked at analysis through times that were equal. And a lot of things happen in March. Sometimes we have breaks, sometimes we have different things. So we chose the September-February timeframe so that we can look at apples, so that we can compare the same data set. The next thing that we wanted to say is that we did not include bus referrals. Bus referrals are a separate part of the discipline, and we wanted to make sure that we had consistent data. So bus referrals are not included in this data set. And as I mentioned previously, we did not include 2021 because we had a statistically low amount of referrals because the majority of our schooling was online. Oh, for those that are joining us through live streaming, and I know we're speaking to a PowerPoint that is available on our district website. So if you're looking to what we're speaking to, that this PowerPoint is available on our district website. So, Mr. Place.
Thank you. So when we're looking at incidents, which are specific events, the number of incidents for the current school year is actually 33% lower when compared to the 3-year average prior to the pandemic for the September through February timeframe. The 3-year average prior to the pandemic was 5,142 incidents compared to 3,439 today. When we look at by building type, elementary schools have seen approximately a 50 to 60% decrease in the number of incidents. Our K-8 schools have seen about approximately a 20% drop. Our middle schools have seen a 40% drop in number of incidents, and our NFA campuses have seen a 2% drop compared to the same time. When we look then to what levels the consequences were that were assigned to each of these incidents, the analysis examined the same time frame. However, this data includes the consequence outcome for each student. So one incident can have multiple students, as mentioned before. Our level 1 district-wide incidents were, prior to the pandemic, we had 5 on average. Those have increased significantly. And again, these are incidents which primarily meant to be handled in the classroom or through interventions by student support personnel, such as our counselors, social workers, or school psychologists. And these have increased. And when a referral at this level occurs, a conference with a student and/or a phone call home is part of the consequence. When we look at level 3 and 4 consequences, which include those that rise to the level of suspension, they have remained statistically unchanged from prior to the pandemic to now. We then took a look at the consequences, and we categorized those into 3 categories that are part of the data set that we submit to the state. Counseling or treatment programs district-wide. Prior to the pandemic, we would have on average 1 that would be sent to counseling or treatment programs, and that has increased now to 215. Out-of-school suspensions are statistically unchanged from prior to the pandemic on average to today, and the suspension from in-class, which are in-school suspensions, those have decreased over the course of the pandemic to now. We then looked to see if there was any differences between the types of levels. And our elementary, again, we have seen an increase in the treatment programs as part of the consequence. Our suspensions have decreased, both for in-school and out-of-school. When we look at K-8, our K-8 buildings, we're seeing the same trends again, an increase in the counseling and treatment programs, but a decrease in our out-of-school suspensions and some increase in our in-school suspension for that level. When we go on to the middle schools, again, an increase in the counseling or treatment program as an option, and then statistically the same for our in-school and out-of-school suspensions. When we move to our NFA campuses, we do see a slight increase for our counseling and treatment programs, but our out-of-school suspensions have increased slightly, and our suspension from class activities have actually decreased. Finally, when we look at the top 5 categories with the highest number of incidents for the 21-22 school year, as with prior analysis, we're only looking at incidents from September through February. Our top 5 categories were insubordination, which actually saw a 50% decrease from prior to the pandemic. We have seen, though, however, skipping class has seen a 20% increase and students being held accountable for that. Minor altercations have actually decreased across the district by 12%, disorderly conduct down by 40%, and disturbing instruction down by 60%. We'll now transition from our district-wide trend analysis to specific data regarding our NFA campuses. Our NFA principals will share their insights on the 21-22 school year behavioral data and the trends they are seeing for our students in grades 9 through 12.
Thank you, Mr. Place. Our focus on NFA specific to Maine North and West, the review of our building level data is concentrated on this school year, 21-22, from September to now May. We'll focus on the code of conduct grade level data, also the number of infractions based on acts of misconduct, types of referrals, and then specific to, as Ms. Peterson explained, to level 1, 2, 3, or 4 disciplinary consequences. That is the way our building level specific to NFA is framed, and now Mr. Glasgow will speak to NFA Maine.
Thank you, Mr. Dotto. At NFA Maine, we looked at our data and we broke it down by grade level, and we also looked at our top 5 incidences categories. As you can see in grade 9, as Mr. Baer mentioned before, who have not been in a normal school year since grade 6, there's 704 incidences. Our grade 10 students who have not had a normal school year since grade 7, 358. Our 11th graders, 95, and our 12th graders, 72. And as you can see, unauthorized absences, insubordination, and minor altercation would be the top 3 out of those 5. So unauthorized absences would be cutting a class, for example. So as you can see, our 9th and 10th graders, a majority of the incidences occurred there out of a total of 1,230 incidences school-wide. So 56% of all our discipline incidences are skipping classes or insubordination. So just like I mentioned, just grades 9 and 10, 86% of all discipline incidents this year have been from those two grade levels. Mr. Dotto?
Thank you, Mr. Glasgow. At NFA North, again, our top 5 based on grade. As you can see, then grade 9 at 299, grade 10, 276, grade 11, 151, and grade 12 at 80. Those are total infractions throughout the school year from September to now. And as you can see also the trend and our trends at NFA, discipline incidences and skipping, that's 57%, and insubordination of the total incidences at NFA North. Interesting to note, it aligns with what Maine Mr. Glasgow just explained, along with the relationship to grade 9 being in the full school year in grade 6, and grade 10 full school year in grade 7. It's important to note as I go to my next slide that again in the 9th and 10th grade, that focus of that 37% and 34% is based on, it's reflective to the data presented earlier for the 9th and 10th graders as they lack that transition to NFA. And one particular note that was not mentioned earlier is also the transition program that we would normally have in the summertime for 9th graders coming into NFA. And also the interventions and operational procedures. So we pivoted a lot, making sure that we use our data to inform our decisions. I would like to explain our weekly cohort meetings. Our cohort teams are comprised of administrators, counselors, attendance aides, social worker, and school psychologists that address daily attendance, grades, discipline, and social-emotional issues. A cohort team, officially a 9th grader, when they enter 9th grade, the clock starts, and they're followed from 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th, and hopefully graduating in 4 years. That's our cohort team that meets weekly and focuses on those issues. Also, our intervention meetings with students by cohort. Coming out of the cohort meetings, faculty and staff would intervene in a proactive approach to meet with those specific students. And also, upon return from a consequence, either suspension, in-school suspension, a transition meeting happens prior to the student going back to regular classes, and that transition team is the cohort team that was previously mentioned, the administrator, the counselor, the attendance aide, the social worker, and school psychologist. Mr. Glasgow?
Thank you, Mr. Dotto. And also on a daily basis, we have our administrative team and security staff, supervision of all students as they arrive into the building, during passing times, in the cafeterias, and also at dismissal times. Constant radio communication with security and administrators during passing times to ensure that all students are getting to classes on time. And also, we are updating our safety protocols and evacuation drills as need be.
Good evening. My name is Michael Regan, Director of Pupil Personnel Services. So we wanted to share with you a little insight into some of the potential root causes behind the behavior that we've presented and some of the discipline data. We knew upon reopening schools that we would really need to get a good baseline understanding of what the social emotional needs of our students were. So we chose to use a universal screener called Panorama, where we asked our students directly how they were doing in various areas, such as social emotional learning competencies, environmental factors, and equity and inclusion. So if you go to the next slide, there's 2 things that really stood out when we did this survey. And we had a large number of students participate. Over 7,000 students responded. The biggest, most glaring detail that we found was emotional regulation was the greatest need. And emotional regulation is a student's ability to calm down once they become upset and de-escalate themselves. So what we found at elementary, only 43% of our scholars responded strongly, meaning that they felt that they had the ability to regulate their emotions. And at secondary, grades 6 through 12, it was about 38%. One thing to really keep in mind, an important thing about emotional regulation, It's a neurological function of the brain that's negatively impacted by trauma. So based on some of the information we shared earlier from the CDC and some of the behavioral data, including teacher removals, when a student is removed from class, that means they have been substantially disruptive to the learning environment. So when you think about emotional regulation, it plays a key role in students' behavior. And trauma is directly tied to that emotional regulation. And we know that even prior to the pandemic, many of our scholars have faced trauma, and the pandemic has further exacerbated that trauma. Some of the strategies we use even prior to the pandemic to address emotional regulation include programs, social emotional learning programs such as Ruler, the Yale Ruler program, Zones of Regulation, Responsive Classroom, Calm Connect, as well as small group and individual counseling. If you go to the next slide, there's another data point that was really important to take into consideration, and that is a student's sense of belonging. At our elementary schools, 74% of our scholars reported a strong sense of belonging. And one thing Panorama allows us to do is compare ourselves nationally to other schools with similar demographics. So we compare ourselves to other urban schools with a higher economically disadvantaged population in a large setting. And what we found was that at the elementary level, our scholars scored 90% stronger than other schools across the country. But as soon as they get into 6th grade, no matter what school building they're in, 6 through 12, we actually score lower than 90% of other schools. So that sense of belonging is a student's ability to feel connected and feel like they belong in their school community, in their school environment, build relationships with peers and adults. One of the strategies that we know works in evidence-based practice is community building circles. So a lot of times we use terminology like restorative practices, but before we could talk about repairing harm once it's been caused, we first have to teach kids how to build and develop those relationships. So a lot of the training and support we've offered around restorative practices is around building relationships. And currently we have each of our secondary school buildings with a committee where they're planning and developing their action plans for implementing community building circles on a larger scale next school year. If you go to the next slide. So in addition to the programming and interventions we offer students, we recognize that it's important to build the capacity of the adults, the teachers who work with these students every day in the classroom. We want to make sure that they were well equipped to respond to any of the trauma or mental health challenges that our students have faced. So for the past 2 years, consecutively, we've offered a trauma-informed schools professional development, which teaches our educators what the impacts of trauma is and how that manifests itself in the classroom, as well as some behavior management strategies to address that. In addition, we've offered for 2 consecutive years introductory PD around restorative practices as it relates to community building circles, so building relationships. We have offered more advanced training for our administration, as well as our pupil personnel services staff and our teachers in how to conduct mediations using a circle format. And we've offered a number of trainings for our PPS staff to make sure that, and when I say PPS, I'm referring to our social workers, psychologists, and counselors, making sure that their clinical capacity is developed so that they can better support our students. We've done that through dialectical behavioral therapy training, as well as critical incident stress management training on teaching our school educators, our pupil personnel, and our administration on how to best support students and adults in times of crisis. In addition to that, just recently, we've been providing teen intervened substance abuse training to provide brief interventions for students struggling with substance use issues. And on the next slide, in addition to the professional development, we have placed great emphasis on making sure we're building and growing the capacity of our team through increasing staffing. In 2016, we significantly increased our PPS staff to support our social emotional learning programs that were mentioned earlier, such as Ruler, so that they can push into the classroom and really help teach our students the skills they need to regulate emotions, such as deep breathing or mindfulness activities, building their emotional vocabulary and emotional intelligence, and learning coping skills to help de-escalate themselves once they become upset. And just recently, this year, as a result of the pandemic and some of the behavioral challenges that we've experienced, we have increased our staff through hiring restorative interventionists. That's also social workers, counselors, and psychologists to help support those students with significant behavioral challenges, and also in the following year, advance the community building circles that happen in the classroom.
Thank you. At this point, we'd like to introduce to you a panel that we've assembled. This is a panel of partners that the school district currently works with. We're very fortunate to have Darcy Miller, our Commissioner for Social Services. We have Philip Peterson from SNUG, Madeline Miller from the Office of Probation, our own district personnel. We have Mark Place, our Chief Information Officer, who's responsible for all the district data. We have Mr. Dotto, who is our Newburgh Free Academy North co-principal and also oversees the NFA West campus. We have Mr. Baer. Mr. Baer is our Assistant Sup for Exceptional Learners. We have Ms. Onyx Peterson, our Deputy Superintendent. I'm Ed Forget, the Interim Superintendent. We have Ms. Alyssa Soto. She is our Assistant Superintendent for Secondary. We have Mr. Glasscott, our co-principal of Main Campus. We have Mr. Michael Regan. Mike Regan is our Director of PPS. We have Dawn Wilson from Team Newburgh. And we have Angela Donaldson, our parent representative. So what we'd like to do at this point in time is to engage in a conversation with a team up here to kind of process the different information that we just heard, listening to the data and the trends across the country, listening to the internal data that's occurring within our school district, and then hearing some recommendations and suggestions about what we're currently doing and what we could do differently. If you go on the website, there's a form for you to submit any question that you want. The questions that were submitted prior to this evening were used to inform the development of the agenda, as well as collect the data so that we were being responsive to what the community wanted to hear, as well as what we felt was important for us to share. So this doesn't end here, this conversation. Through this conversation that you hear this evening, that form will remain on the district website. We encourage you, we request that you ask as many questions as you possibly can. Go on to that website. We will respond to them. That's the strategy that we've used pretty much for a lot of the forums so that we can get as much information out. And it won't just be an exchange that we respond to you as an individual. It would be a collective response that you can all see all the different questions that are asked and the response that we provide. So at this time, we'll open up to the panel. Based on what you heard, what are some things that you have some comments about, or you have some recommendations, or perhaps there are other individual groups within the county that we can partner with? I'll just open the floor for comment. Darcy Miller.
Okay. Well, good evening. Thank you for inviting me to be here with you this evening and for sharing your data with all of us. I think we'd all be a bit surprised to see that you have had a reduction in your incidents over the 2016 school year. So congratulations on that. I think you've been doing a lot of good work. Additionally, I want to say hiring the staff that you have has to make a difference in being able to connect with students one-on-one. I would add to what you have been doing, what I've been able to participate in. Michael Regan has led the monthly interagency collaboration between your district and many of you here on the panel today and others, and many of our community agencies, both my departments. I'm actually Commissioner of Mental Health and Social Services, so the conversation impacts both departments. And I have been incredibly inspired by the work of your staff and their connection to your students, to your families, and to our service providers. Does that mean you get to reach every student? No. But what you're showing is exactly what we see statistically across the country, around the world, and our targeted focus in both of our departments is that young people have lost approximately a year to 2 years of their social and developmental skills. Based on the pandemic, based on being isolated and working remote, academically, they may not have lost their competencies to the same extent as they have in their social development. So I appreciate that you're paying close attention to that work. I would also add that the multi-tiered system that you have been training on in PBIS, about 15 years ago, the Department of Mental Health did significant training across the county on positive behavioral interventions and supports, looking at a district-wide, building-wide, district-wide implementation of PBIS, and we saw significant reductions in the number of incidents using those standards. And they've added, as you know, the additional academic portion to that social emotional curriculum. Can't say enough about the potential. The challenge is really getting the champions within each school and getting the buy-in across your buildings and then throughout your district, but appreciate that you're thinking about adding that even to the social emotional curriculums you're already using. Love community building circles. That's so important for the face-to-face social interaction, so that's really good work. Teen Intervene, I just want to say, and I'm sure Dawn could speak to it, but we had 12 referrals, I think it was, in the year 2021. We had 132 referrals this year across the county. So we're seeing that. We're seeing it making the front page of the newspapers. And I think the point that you made, that there's more access now that students are back in school, so we're seeing that increase in their substance use. Also, as we all know, any unmet or under-treated mental health issue can lead to using of substance, trying to self-medicate or address that need. So it's very important we address those mental health needs. Our concerns about young people and their mental health needs are so significant that the Attorney General issued a national report this year really informing our country about what concerns we have around our children and what their mental health wellness what the needs may be and how it may impact their functioning and their abilities in schools and homes and in their community. I say as a outpatient mental health professional for many, many years, I feel like the burden on schools has been increased dramatically over the past decades. Really you're responsible for training and, teen violence prevention and substance use prevention and identifying mental health symptomology and addressing it and, anti-bullying programming and social emotional learning curriculums. And you really have embraced that role. While the locus of your work has to be on academics, so I challenge us all, and I'm so glad to see some of your community and your parents here today. Children are in 3 places. They're in their schools, they're in their pediatrician's offices, they're in their homes. So for all of us to be educated about what we can do to help keep our children mentally and emotionally well, it has to be all 3 of those areas targeting the work. So just so you know, in addition to what you're doing in the schools, we're embarking across the county on a 0 to 5 initiative where we really want to be looking at what do we have currently to address the mental and emotional wellness of our infants through 5th grade or 5 years old, like healthy families where you have people going into the home and supporting parents in how they're parenting and supporting their children, to early intervention services, to mental health services. We understand that in daycare you were having acting out behavior. I'm sure in kindergarten you're seeing some of that behavior. They weren't in school, so they didn't get to learn how to sit at a desk and how to keep their hands to themselves in a way. So we acknowledge that we all need to do better, and addressing that early education piece can make a difference throughout their whole academic experience. I would also note that the federal government acknowledges that we have challenges with the families who are struggling financially to get their kids exposed early to like daycare or nursery. So they have changed federal legislation which allows us to the Department of Social Services, if a child goes into daycare because their parents are working, if the parents lose their job, they will continue to have that supplemental daycare support for a full year. So we will not disrupt their interaction in their daycare service, which is very positive for social development, and we appreciate that. Additionally, the governor added to her budget this year that for those who need daycare support, we can support families up to 300% of the poverty level. And for Orange County, that's $82,000 a year for a family of 4. So it allows for a much broader eligibility for that daycare support. They've also put funding in to expand the number of slots because we lost many slots during the pandemic, so that will help children in their emotional development. So, you know, it doesn't just start in kindergarten, it starts before or in pre-K for all of you. And we hope that in working together as we have for decades, we'll continue to have wellness among our students. But I really applaud the programming that you're putting in place and appreciate that I get to participate to whatever extent I can. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Miller. I just wanted to also discuss what the interagency collaboration is for the community. Prior to the pandemic, probably about 2 years before the pandemic, we started to notice behaviors and we started to notice some chronic issues with our students, and we really felt that we needed to have a better collaboration to get access to community supports. So this was about 2 years, I think, Darcy, before the pandemic. We started to have a system by which building level administrators could refer tier 3, so we have a student that is in dire need, to this committee where we get all the community-based agencies together to see how we can provide wraparound supports for our students. So prior to the pandemic, and this actually really helped us, these relationships that we built while we were in the pandemic, when we had food insufficiency for families, we were able to collaborate at a much quicker pace, and I think that is why we were able to provide training and support for our students and staff, because we had already started to notice some of our behavioral trends. We noticed that our students were struggling with their learning environments, and we noticed our younger students needed more wraparound support. So that collaboration really helped us throughout the pandemic, and when we need additional support from the county and other community-based, we have those predetermined partnerships. So I just wanted to explain what that was, and we've been, you know, operating, and I'm happy to say that it's been pretty successful.
Thank you, Mrs. Miller. Thank you, Mrs. Peterson. Another county agency that does some collaboration work with us is the Office of Probation. So we've been fortunate to have Mr. Davidian and Ms. Miller come in proactively to talk about what are some of the programs they can offer to work with families and to work with the school district. Ms. Miller, can you share a little bit about those programs?
One of the programs that, I don't know if you can hear me, one of the programs that we run is the Strengthening Families program, which is actually happening right now across the parking lot. And we did some training with some of the school district staff and invited them to work with us and offered them slots to refer children who they thought would benefit from the program. And we're going to be running it, I believe, in the spring and the fall. We used to just do once a year, but I think we are going to be doing it twice a year now. So we're going to be working with them. We're going to continue to support them with training and co-facilitating. We also have Girls Circle that we can do in the schools together. And we've been working with another county agency, ADAC, to possibly work on some other things that would help address violence.
Thank you. Mrs. Donaldson is a parent that has worked in collaboration with the district and served on many committees as the voice of parents when we make hiring decisions or inform program development or program selection. Mrs. Donaldson, how do you feel about what you heard and how we're trying to address it, and do you have any recommendations for us? Use mics.
of, what
So I'd just like to add to what Mr. Regan said, and I think it's really important during this time when we're all trying to understand how our students are manifesting these issues, that learning behavior is as developmental as learning math, English, social, or science. And if we don't understand that in this dialogue that we're having, then we're missing the mark. Kids need to be taught how to manage emotions, how to strategize conflict, how to actually interact with conflict without necessarily having to become something bigger than it needs to be. We take it for granted that these things should just be in our child's repertoire, and they're not. And when trauma is introduced in kids' lives, it only exacerbates that concern. So as we begin to build out these programs, we take that fully into account, that we have to explicitly teach our kids how to be able to manage their emotions, how to be able to self-regulate, how to interact appropriately with their peers. You can draw your own conclusions from the data, but we have been very intentional around these programs at the elementary level for now 6 years. And if you look at some of the discipline data, you do see a decrease. That is not, in my opinion, random or coincidental. The reason being, our kids are developing the emotional vocabulary. We have kids who are in the ruler program elementary, and when they get to middle school, the guidance counselors say, these kids know the vocabulary. They actually use the meter on their own as they come into the new education arena. So it's something that, as a community, we really need to really understand in this time when all of these behaviors are becoming more concerning, is that we can't just consequate. We have to also teach. And we have to understand that all our kids have the right to an education and have the right to dignity and respect in that process, and that we have the responsibility to ensure that they get everything they need, and no two children are alike.
Thank you, Mr. Baer. Ms. Wilson, Team Newburgh.
Can I just say my last name is Wilkin?
Wilkin.
So that's why everyone can say it as Wilkin. So for those of you not aware, and we know it's self-reported. There's definitely more clarity and clearness when we ask about perception versus actual use. But as I was listening, and I'm sure the gentleman from Snugs will chime in on this as well, what they're living in the community, they're bringing into the school. So if a child is surrounded with substance use or domestic violence, how are they going to come into the school and adequately learn, right? Because they're coming in already a level down because they're dealing with what they're dealing with at home. So that's where Team Newburgh tries to come in and help to make those connections and work on those different things. Like, for an example, just from January to March of this year, of 2021, there were 45 calls to the Hudson Valley Emergency Management Services for a call for a Narcan reversal. So that's 45 within those few months. 21 of those occurred within the city of Newburgh itself. So that represents 46.6% of those calls. So this is what the children, you know, are living with. They tell me during groups that they're seeing the youth in their backyards. They're scared to look out their windows. They don't know if they're going to get hurt if they get caught looking. So these are some of the things that we try to talk to the kids about and try to get them to understand that it doesn't have to be that way. When we talk about actual youth, our last survey was 2019, and I'm working with Mike on the next one for the early fall, hopefully. We'll get that in there. Because we have some things that are happening in our communities. We have the legalization of recreational cannabis, which our youth are already saying by 12th grade, 58% of the youth, that's it, see it as potentially risky. That's it. So now add the legalization of that. Those perceptions are going to dip. Those perceptions lead into use later in life. So as we see this, I just really want to point out, when we talk about substance use, it is a progression. It doesn't start necessarily at heroin. It starts younger. It starts, and the younger you start, before the age of 15, if you begin using, you are 4 times more likely to develop an addiction in your lifetime. So that is the importance of prevention and getting in it early so we can educate. We won't be there when the child has to make the decision whether or not what they're going to do with the peer pressure, but we can give them the skills to negate that. so that they have the ability to do that. And a lot of things that were being said, we're hearing from the students themselves, and they're telling us. Interestingly, there's been a big push within the community about prescription drug use and misuse. And in 2019, across all grades, we measure 8, 10th, and 12th, there was below 5% youth reported. So that's huge. That tells us that they definitely feel their parents disapprove, but they don't feel their peers. That now add into that COVID and the isolation and the trauma they're experiencing at home, because for some kids, coming to school is their escape. Now there's no escape. And now they're coming back into the building. So I do applaud the district for everything that you've been doing to try to help to support them, because we knew when we started coming back face to face that this was going to be a problem and an issue for the students because of what some of them were exposed to. There was hunger. There were different things that they're dealing with that the school provided for them that they were now not getting. So there were different things that they had to deal with, and so I'm not surprised with seeing some of the things, especially in those transitional grades, 9th and 10th grade. That's a hard time for any kid to go into high school, and then you haven't been in a regular school for how many years before that to even have that basis to do that. So it makes sense that, of what we're seeing with the kids. And so some of the things that we've been working on, or we have worked on with the district, we trained all the nurses to use Narcan. As a coalition, and then we also helped behind the scenes with the policy that the district needed to implement to store that within the district. So we were helping with that. We helped to create the hygiene closet so the kids could go get hygiene products and without any questions asked within the different buildings. And let us know when you're ready to start a fundraiser on that again, because we'll put it out there and we'll raise the products. And this is how wonderful the community is. We would get anywhere from $10,000 to $16,000 worth of hygiene products for the kids, so the kids could have them. The schools were showing the kids how to use the washing machines at the high school level. They were giving them quarters and stuff so they could go and wash their clothes, because if you're coming to school as a teenager, like your appearance is everything, right? Now you're coming in, my clothes aren't washed. I stink. I don't have soap at home. I don't have shampoo. That plays into absenteeism. And so if that's something simple that as a community we can come together and wrap around and provide those things for those students, that's something that we can all help to do, right? Because it's not the kids' fault. And we have to understand that these are kids. And, it's so easy to be like, oh, these kids, but it takes a community, for this. We've done, right now we're working on a Share Music Not Meds campaign, and it is with the Boys and Girls Club youth right now. They just created a PSA that we're having edited to go out on YouTube and on social media, and they're going to work with us to reach the other kids within the district with this messaging. And what we're going to do, we run 2 Good for Drugs programs that could go kindergarten into high school, that it's not just about drugs, it's about, well, how do you say no? Because it's not just no. And everyone thinks it's so simple, but when you're in that situation, how do you get out of that? What does that look like? And we put them in those positions and we role play, and, it's consequence. Not everything is going to go the way you want. That doesn't mean that life is over. This is life. And so we teach them that these things are normal and that happens. The girl circles, we do those. When we can get a male facilitator, we do the boys' councils. The Teen Intervene that you mentioned earlier. So what that is, and thank you, Darcy, Teen Intervene is a brief intervention. So if you have a student that is showing signs, maybe they've gotten into a little trouble and there's some substance use issues in there, it's a 3-session intervention where it's a full assessment that will allow that person doing it to say, okay, you know what? This child just lost a parent and they just lost a job, so they're acting out. They need some community support, so let me reach out. Or it says, they need a little bit higher level of care than what this can provide and what we can do at the district. So that's allowing them to do that, and as one of the trainers providing that training to the district, thank you, because it's a wonderful program. So we've done quite a few things with the district, and we're happy for that partnership, but we also know that they need continual support as well. You as parents, you need continual support as well, right? because parenting is the hardest job you'll ever have, and there's no guidance. You don't come out of the hospital with a manual and say, this is how you're a good parent. It doesn't work like that. You learn as you go. And so we have supports out here, and we're here to help and at any time for anything that, we can do for the community and the families. So I just wanted to thank everybody for, allowing us to be a part of this. We will continue to grow that relationship with the district and the parents and the community as they allow us. And thank you again for your time and coming out tonight. This is really important.
Thank you. Just for those individuals that are listening through YouTube, we are having problems with the voice technology. We are trying to get that fixed. So we will do our best to make sure that you can hear some of the information that we're sharing, and we will do some repeats of what we said. So I apologize again for the technology. Ms. Peterson is going to talk a little bit about SNUG.
So we definitely live in a community that experiences really difficult situations. Now I'm adding to the technical difficulties. And I really wanted to take a moment to talk about SNUG and what they did for our district in the fall. We all know that we experienced gun violence, many of which were students that attended. Though it happened in the community, it impacted our school community. What was nice is that when we contacted SNUG and we asked them to collaborate, it's important to have, as Mr. Howard also always says, boots on the ground, and people that understand what our students are going through and can have the conversations and can talk to our students in a way to make better decisions. I just wanted to thank SNUG and also to just talk about their collaboration and what they're also seeing in the community. They did a great service to us in the fall, and we're really appreciative of it. Just getting out there, explaining the programs, and trying to build future collaborations with us.
This one should.
So at SNUG, basically what we do is we try to touch base with these kids out here best we can, because it starts home pretty much so with these youth, and it's kind of hard for them to express themselves. So with us being out there, hitting the ground running, and just touching base with these kids, they like to see that from a person that's like from them, that's they can relate to. But our problem is more with the parents too. We need their help also to do our job effectively. So now it's spilling into the schools more, and we're starting to notice that. So we've been connecting with a lot of these people up here with the schools so we can get in there. They're allowing us to come in there to see those familiar faces and try to get a hold of it before it escalates more. And it's becoming a little issue now because we don't have that support really in the community like that with the kids as far as with the parents. So we've been touching base with all those kids that we actually see on a daily basis, and we provide them more after-school programs for them to attend instead of being out there expressing themselves in a negative way. So now we got, basically we just opened up to the Boys and Girls Club, so that's good. And we're trying to get people to come there more. The Armory, trying to get them to do other things, stay proactive in a positive way. Just got the cosmetology classes up there at the Armory for the girls. So if you feel you need a younger female or even older females to come up there and to teach or to observe or just to bring the kids there. As far as the males, we have the studio up there, so we're trying to get them involved in that. A lot of these kids like the rap scene or the music scene. It's a form of expression. So we open that up, everything is free. But we have a problem in getting people there, and it starts with the community. Like, we can pass these flyers out as much as possible, but it's wasted money, wasted funds if nobody's attending. And now it's just, we're not giving up. We're still going to be out there. We're still going to keep beating the grounds. We're still going to keep, hey, how you doing? Coming with smiles. Hey, that's not right. You shouldn't do that. Best we can with our resources. But again, we can't do it without the community, the support of the community. And it starts with the schools too. Because 90% of y'all students, well, 90% of our kids in this community, it starts with the schools. They're the ones that's seeing these kids practically, 8 hours out of the day? So they know the kids better than some of these parents. So we're trying to communicate with them best we can, to connect with them best we can, so we can have a better understanding of those students, of those kids. Because that's where it starts at, having a better understanding of them instead of judging and doing that. And I appreciate all y'all support. And together we're gonna make this happen. Thank y'all.
Thank you. And I need to just be real upfront. It's really great to hear that we're doing all this wonderful work, but more importantly, what is the work that we're not doing? We have to really think about where are the gaps that we have, because we should not be experiencing the levels of kind of behaviors that we're experiencing. So we need help to figure out not only where are those gaps, but why are there those gaps? And that's only going to happen if we open communication and we begin to really talk and have dialogue and be open to what the conversation is. I don't want to go into a conversation and walk out saying we are perfect, because we are not perfect. But if we care and we engage in conversations to really figure out what it is that needs to change and be done, and actually follow through to make that happen, our students, all 11,000 of them, are going to benefit from it. And every one of them are important. There's not a night that I go to sleep that I don't worry about every single one of those students. And Onyx and I talk constantly in the morning about what we worried about throughout the evening. These are really difficult times. It can't be my lens and my thinking. It's got to be our lens, our thinking. So when we send out surveys, when we send out opportunities to come in and dialogue, when we design after-school programs, if those after-school programs are not the right after-school programs to address the needs of our students, we need to hear that. Because we're offering after-school programs and students aren't attending them, we've got to figure out why. We're putting a lot of resources into it. The county is putting in a lot of resources into our Empire program. But if we're not having the students come, we've got to figure out why they're not coming. Is it the time? Is it the topic? Is it not engaging? Is it outdated? Is it not relevant to their personal experiences? Is it built for one mindset versus the actual stakeholder and community that we have? Those are things we have to begin to work on together. This is not going to get fixed in one night. We have students that have not experienced education in a formal setting for over 2 years. When you think about the transition from an elementary student to a middle school student, those are the toughest years of that child's life to begin with. Now we expect them to just perform. We've got to work together to address this. Our teachers are prepared and ready. Our administrators are prepared and ready. And we are open to conversations with you for whatever you want to share with us. We'll process that. We'll figure it out. We have stimulus funding. The stimulus funding is there to do what's right for kids. And it can't be what Ed wants or what Onyx wants. It's what we want as a community. So we will be reaching out, asking for your input. We have a survey. We have the form that's on the district's website right now. Throw information in there. Give us your ideas. Give us your thoughts. Give us what you're not happy about. Tell us what you want. And we'll begin to address that, and we'll work together to do it. I hope you know that we're genuine, and we really do want what's best for this community. I've lived here my whole life. My family's been here their whole life. My mother grew up in the community. We're invested. We're not going anywhere. We love Newburgh. And it's not just that love, it's that commitment. So we're looking for the commitment. We're ready to do it. We want to do it with you. Anything?
I just want to share my sentiment. I know that Mr. Forget said that we speak every morning about what occurs in our schools, and we know that some of the things that we see are troubling. One thing that we often talk about is, as much as we could prepare, nothing prepared us for the return for our students. Professional developments, trying to prepare teachers, their anxieties, because we also have to also prepare the adults in the environment. They're going through a lot of things as well. And re-engaging them in a learning process for our students has not been easy either, and to support them. I think that just having a dialogue and a conversation, I know part of the reason we wanted everyone to hear, because I don't think that we've been communicating all the things that we've done in terms of a staff and what we've implemented within the district. I think it's also important to note that we do need the support of the community. We need to have the dialogue so that we can shape a learning environment that suits your needs as well. Your children, we do care for them for a large part of the day, and we want to get our students across Academy Field. So it is important. We want them to come to a safe and secure environment. But discipline and behavior is something. We're trying to produce citizens. Many of us who live in Newburgh stay in Newburgh, and we need to make sure that we have productive citizens, and for them to understand emotional regulation is not just an adolescent thing, it's also an adult thing. So if they do not know the skills to address situations when they're in the grocery market, or they're in the mall, or they're having a conflict with a friend, it spills out into our community in other ways. And I'm sure Mrs. Miller can tell you, and probation can tell you, these are lifelong skills. And the things that we've done in terms of the elementary level and what we are trying to build on the secondary level are going to help our students long term. We have to understand our emotions. We have to learn how to cope with things. So we do encourage you. We will be reaching out, and we will be working along with building administration to address some of the things that we are seeing. As Mr. Regan stated, we have used our funds to try to build the systems at the secondary because we know that there are concerns. But again, Rome was not built in a day, and we have to put in systems and structures.
So before we close for the evening, I think it's important to hear one more time from the parent. That voice is very, very needy in our district, and we need to be responsive to it. So I'm going to ask Mrs. Donaldson one more time to go to an active mic to have that conversation so you can hear her as well as the individuals that are listening online. No.
Okay, let's see. You can hear me? Oh, okay. So I guess I'm pretty much going to kind of reiterate a lot of what I had said before, which was that I was glad to see that you're not just being reactive, but proactive. And some of the things that I had suggested, which you had already kind of talked about, but you really have to have that school-wide approach to behavior, as you were talking with some of the solutions, which I think would be most effective, because most kids, they have to come into an environment where they feel safe. If they don't feel safe, they're not going to be there, they're not going to perform, the way that they should, or they can, if they're in an environment that's, kind of toxic to them. It's like, well, why should I be here? I'm going to leave. Again, what you were talking about with the after-school programs, I think what you have to look at is relevancy. You're right, cultural relevancy. You have to meet the kids where they're at, you know what I'm saying, and understand what it is that they want. And how do you do that? Ask them. They'll tell you. You have to go out to them and ask them, what do you want? What do you need? What will help you? What type of environment, school environment would be, conducive for you to make sure that they're going to be coming in, so that you're going to have that high absenteeism rate going on. So a lot of what you're talking about, really, I wish we had some of the kids here, because the kids will actually tell you, have a little forum for them, have sort of like a town hall, get everybody. The kids who are having maybe disciplinary problems, talk to them. Well, why? What's going on? How come you felt this way? I noticed when you were talking about disciplinary issues, they were saying it was absenteeism and it was also insubordination. Okay, insubordination can be very subjective. It depends on the person who's saying, oh, this person was being insubordinate. How? Break that down, because sometimes for one person it could be, they'll tell them, oh, so-and-so is this, and they'll describe it in detail. For another child, they'll just say insubordination without any specifics, and that makes a big difference. And if that child's constantly getting insubordination, eventually they're going to get suspended. Okay, whereas if it could have been something like, oh, well, they were just being very loud or whatever, something like that, it makes a difference. So I think it's important to do the school-wide approach to behavior, the PBIS, but the school-wide approach to that, I think would be most effective. Because then the kids will see, okay, that is fair. You're not just picking on me for this reason or for that reason. Again, with the after-school programs, they have to be relevant to the kids. And the way you're going to find out about that, you have to ask the kids, and they will tell you. They're not, they will speak up and tell you. I don't have to tell you that. They're not shy, a lot of them. So, but, yeah, that's it. And like I said before, I think it's just so important. I'm so glad this is happening because you have all stakeholders here. It is a communal effort. It's not just the school. It's not just administrators. It's all of us, teachers, parents, administrators, the community, the program here, Team Newburgh, what you guys are doing over there in the probation, and what you just spoke about with the kids when you were saying, talking about relevancy. That's it's so key. So it's definitely working together, being collaborative in our efforts to get things done for the kids, because the bottom line, it's about the kids, it's for the kids. But we also play a role in it, especially as parents. Like I said, I wish there were more parents who were here, who would get more involved with things, because we can make it happen. We can make it happen. If we don't like something, trust me, as a parent, you have a lot of power as a parent, and you have to realize that. You have to use it. You have to use it with your vote. You have to use it, just coming here and talking, voicing your opinions about things. People listen. And what's great about, I believe anyway, with this school district, they really do listen. And they really do their best to try to work with us to get the best for the kids, because they care, and you want a school district that cares. Also, when I said the teachers also need your support. You put a lot on teachers. Think about what happened through the pandemic. You have some teachers, they weren't really that savvy with technology, but they got thrown into it. And just to give you an idea what it's like for a teacher, when it happens, you're teaching a kid in the classroom, and you're also, you're teaching the kid online. And sometimes you can't even see them. They can see you, on the computer. So just making that adjustment of trying to get them just to finagle that was just a lot to navigate. Of course, everybody's experts now because you had it for 2 years, so you can figure it out. But also, you have to keep that in mind. Think about the teacher, because the teacher has that impact on the student directly. They're in that classroom with them. So if you're telling them, I want you to do this, this, and that, okay, fine, most teachers would do it, but support me. Give me the people that I need. Give me the equipment that I need. Okay? They won't mind doing it, and I can talk to you personally from that, having been a teacher. So I can understand, I can empathize with them. I understand that. So it's everybody. It's the teachers, it's the parents, it's the kids. But most importantly, we want to make sure our kids get the best education that they can have. And the only way we can do that, we have to all work together. You can't just have separate entities. It does not work. We've tried that. That doesn't work. It just doesn't work. So I think if we keep that same mindset that we have right now going on, I think we can continue to succeed. I mean, like you said, Rome wasn't built in a day. So, we have to take steps to get to it. But I think if we start, as you mentioned before, with the relevancy, with the programs that you have, those are excellent starts. And to build upon it, ask the kids. They will give you all the information that you need. That's it.
Thank you very much. That concludes our program for this evening. Again, please submit any questions, ideas, suggestions on the forum that's on the newburghschools.org website. It is on the banner. And if you don't want to do it that way, you can give me a call, you can give Onyx a call, or any of our team members a call, or email us. Whatever works for you will work for us. Thank you very much for this evening. We appreciate you coming out, and we look forward to hearing your comments.